The name of the book is A Company of Heroes. Now, have I got you intrigued? I certainly hope so. And I hope you'll stay around for the next quarter hour as I talk with Tim Kazee. He's the author of the book, A Company of Heroes. Let's get connected on Weekend Connection. Good afternoon. Welcome to Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. My name is Ed Phillips, and my guest today is an author by the name of Tim Kazee. He has authored a book just recently called A Company of Heroes, Portraits from the Gospel's Global Advance. Tim, welcome. Welcome to Weekend Connection.
Thank you, Ed. Great to be here.
It is great to have you, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your very, very busy schedule to do this Weekend Connection program with me and for our BBN listeners. This book, when this came across my email, really intrigued me because, frankly, we just don't see a whole lot of books like this out on the market, period. And so I was really wanting to talk with you. But before we launch into the contents of the book and even the backstory of the book, how about a bit of a backstory on you, your growing up, and how you came to faith,
Mhm.
and let our listeners in on that?
I grew up in Virginia, 10th generation Virginian. God blessed me with wonderful Christian parents. I was in a Bible preaching and believing church, and at the age of 10, came to faith in Christ, seeing my need of Him, grew and sensed a calling to serve Him in the gospel ministry, and especially in an overseas context where there was little gospel. So the Lord grew my heart in those ways over those high school and college years, and been a lot to shape my path.
Now, did you serve overseas for a while?
I have never lived overseas in a long term sense. I've spent more than 25 years in ministry and mobilizing and training and in positioning men and women in overseas settings. But for myself, I've only been in that sort of leadership, oversight, mobilizing role, but not actually living long term in another country.
But I can well imagine you have taken many, many overseas trips, correct?
About 90 countries now, I think. But yes, a lot of frequent flyer miles.
I'll bet. And where's some of the places you've been to?
Our ministry started when the Berlin Wall came down. So my initial travel in terms of the global church ministry was in the former Iron Curtain countries, in Ukraine and Russia and former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, in that part of the world, Albania. But over these past number of years, we we have people who are serving, and I've been in countries from North Africa, Afghanistan, Central Asia to the Far East.
And when you take these trips, is it primarily to visit workers or missionaries who are working in these countries and or doing other things as well?
One of the primary reasons is to be with our families who are serving on the field. It's also to investigate possible major projects that we might get behind and support if it's a big Bible distribution effort or a radio ministry, something on that order. So I'm scouting out those opportunities. And over the last dozen years, I've also made trips to produce films, documentary style films that are based in my journals. These films are called Dispatches from the Front. And so I'll make a trip to just to be able to, and not just, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity to be able to share what God is doing, how Christ is building his church, even in the really hard places. So I'll take trips for those purposes as well.
That is really great. And these stories need to be told more and more and more because I think a lot of the global church, especially here in North America, really doesn't hear about these stories.
When we started producing these films and just even just in my own journal writing, which is the basis for the books that have been published and for the films, I want to bring in my brothers and sisters here in this country into the story. I want them to be able to see what I'm seeing and to hear what I'm hearing as we see this every tribe, every tongue gospel across every kind of barrier. I feel so often like I'm getting glimpses of Revelation 5:9 when people from every tribe and tongue are declaring the worth of the Lamb. I love to bring people into that story because I think it magnifies God, and it also grows our confidence in the gospel. And it's also I believe, a constant reminder, and we need this reminder, that the church is not in decline in the world.
That's a good word, and I'm reminded, of course, of Matthew 16:18, where Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
is this how your book here, A Company of Heroes, was birthed? Was it through these myriad of trips traveling overseas and you're observing things going on, watching God work?
Yeah. A few years ago, Crossway published a book entitled Dispatches from the Front, and it was a collection of my journal entries from, I don't know, 25 countries or so. But there's been so many more stories and so many more brothers and sisters that I've been able to share the path with, that I wanted to write more stories, and I wanted to bring out characteristics of their lives. So in this newest book, A Company of Heroes, each chapter is sort of a miniature biography of men and women on the field. There are a few chapters about people from the past, but primarily about people today serving. And it's a way to point out aspects of their lives that I think point us to Christ, where we see whether it's how they face fear or extraordinary examples of endurance or compassion or gospel boldness. So it's an outgrowth of my journals from my experiences with people on the field.
I was looking at your table of contents before our interview, and I was thinking to myself, my goodness, throughout not only modern day history, but history farther back, there are so many people you could have chosen. And I'm looking at the list here. For example, Samuel Zwemer, pioneer to the Middle East, Bahrain, and
Yes.
Jerusalem, and yet there are others, many of whom I've not heard of. And so, how did the Lord lead you to choose these? Let me see here, 17.
Yeah, 17 chapters, and in each of them, there may be a family that I'm highlighting or a number. For example, there's a chapter there about, it's called Shepherds. It's about pastors that have impacted my life. There are a number of people within each of those chapters, typically, but it's a very good question, and it was a tough call. I would say that one of the things that's important to me is to have some like physical connection to the person, even if it's a hero from the past, like Samuel Zwimmer. So I was in the Middle East, in the places where he served. I went to the hospital that he and his team founded in what 1902, I believe, and went and visited his daughter's grave. I tracked down where they were buried because there's a very poignant passage in his autobiography about the week in which he and his wife, their two daughters, passed away from an epidemic that swept through Bahrain. So I wanted to find these places and share that through my journal. While there's so many heroes from the past I love to write about, I based it on those that I had some kind of contact with from their experiences, so that I could bring the reader into the location.
Now, I noticed chapter 5, A Hero in the Battle of Life, Carl Kazee. Is that your father?
Yes, yes, that's about my dad.
And then others such as Danny Brooks, Salt Lake City, Utah, and
Mhm.
Roger Whale, London and Leningrad, and just a variety of different people you feature in this book.
They're not all missionaries as such. I mean, Roger Wheel, for example, he's a dear friend. He's I think soon will be celebrating his 85th birthday, but he was an architect his entire life, sort of architect by day and Bible and typewriter smuggler on the side. God used him in amazing ways during the depths of the Cold War to encourage the church behind the Iron Curtain. And yeah, they're not all missionaries as such. A lot of ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things through the power of God and His presence with them.
Yes, but isn't it amazing that God uses the giftings and skills that He pours into us through the years and uses them to expand His kingdom? And I'm constantly reminded of my wife's father. Her father and mother went to the mission field years ago to Asia, and he grew up the son of a contractor, a very successful contractor. Thought he was going to take over the family business. He was an architectural draftsman, ended up on the field, and years later helped design buildings, skyscrapers, as a matter of fact. And it's just amazing to me how God puts the pieces together for His honor and namesake.
Yes, it's not wasted. Exactly right.
Not at all. What was the toughest chapter of this book you feel that you wrote?
Oh, probably the chapter on Afghanistan, sharing stories of some friends who were killed there, the responses of team members that were left behind. That was a hard chapter. There's a lot of resurrection hope in that chapter, but there was also a lot of tears. Yeah, those were difficult days.
I'm sure. And what are your hopes and prayers for this book? How do you want to see God use this book in the lives of individuals and families and churches?
I want them to see that we have an amazing God, a powerful gospel that crosses every kind of barrier. There's nothing like it. Christ is building His church all over the world, and I think of it, his kingdom is a borderless kingdom. He is bringing men and women to Himself from every nation. So we get those reminders of it through our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world and even right here at home. So I want God to be magnified. The writing of this book for me is an act of worship. It's a means of pointing my brothers and sisters to Christ, and those who don't know Him to see what an amazing Savior He is.
Well, that's my prayer too, and I'm sure the prayer of many of our BBN listeners. As you well know, we have many parents and grandparents who listen to BBN, and one of my prayers is that this book will be put in schools as well as used by many homeschoolers as a part of their curriculum.
Yeah, it's fun for me to hear from homeschool families that are using the Dispatches films, for example, and some of the books for their geography lessons, but as a way of growing a kingdom perspective in the hearts of their kids. So may God use it to His glory in all of these ways.
Tim Kazee, thank you so much for joining me and our BBN listeners on Weekend Connection today. The title of the book is A Company of Heroes, Portraits from the Gospel's Global Advance. And I'm assuming this is in bookstores by now, so be looking out for it. A Company of Heroes, Portraits from the Gospel's Global Advance. Tim Kazee, thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Connection.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks very much.
I thank you so very much for listening to Weekend Connection today. Weekend Connection is a public affairs program of the Bible Broadcasting Network, and it's heard every Saturday afternoon following the 4 p.m. Eastern Time news. Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.